I am here with Let Em Riot. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
How was your time at Neon? I know I kind of bumped into you there for a brief period.
Yeah, it was great. It was a little hectic, running around just bumping into all sorts of different people. And the cool thing about Neon was it was just a whole bunch of people that I'd known and I'd spoken to for, over years, just, on social media and just collaborated and talked to. So it was really cool to finally meet a lot of faces like in person. It made it hectic and it made it exciting all at the same time.
Were you only there for like a day or were you there for the whole shebang?
I got there late Friday night. Yeah, I didn't get to see much of the show on Friday. I think I caught like Protector 101 set after I checked in and got settled. And then I was, had the show on Saturday and then I left Sunday afternoon. So, yeah, I was there for a good portion of it. I would have much rather to be able to, stay all 3 days and check out everybody. So I didn't get to see everyone that I wanted to see on Sunday.
Well, I'm sure they'll be back next year. It seemed like there were a lot of people there.
Yeah, I'm hoping because it was just the whole weekend was just amazing. To me it looked like a huge success. I'd be surprised if they decided not to do it next year.
You originally got into playing music after you saw Motley Crue on MTV when you were.
Yeah, I was actually yeah I was I remember very vividly because I was 9 years old. Dr. Feelgood had just come out, and so that it was the Dr. Feelgood video on MTV that I saw, and I remember my jaw just being wide open and being like, oh my god, these guys look so freaking cool. I want to be that. And I remember my mom walked in the room as I was watching the video, and she's like, "What are you watching?" And I'm like, "You got to see this. This looks amazing." And she's like, "No, no, you're not gonna listen to that." She's like, she's like, "They're all devil worshippers. Look at the way they're dressed. Look at this video. No, this is the devil's music." And I was like, "No, this is awesome." And then I remember like shortly after that, I gathered up all my allowance money and I just rode my bike to the record store and I bought the Dr. Feelgood album, and I was hooked ever since.
Were your parents like big believers in the whole satanic panic deal back then?
Yeah, a little bit because it's like I had a whole tape collection. I mean, this is I didn't even have CDs. I had cassette tapes, and I would bring home. I'd sneak out to the record store and buy tapes with my own money, and I'd come back and my parents would just flip out at the covers. I mean, it was like Iron Maiden, Megadeth. Motley Crue. I bought the album Shout at the Devil, so and it had a pentagram. And my mom was just like, "This is satanic music." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's rock and roll." But like, it says "Shout at the Devil," and we would just go back and forth. And they did not like the fact that I was listening to that kind of music.
I
Okay.
found that you were, maybe you've been in more, but these were the ones that I could find. Before Let 'Em Riot, you were in four bands. First was The Ex-Presidents, then Grover's Headache, Jeffrey's Fan Club, and then The Appearance, correct?
Yeah, those were the main bands. I've been in bands that were just like we got started and things didn't work out. But as far as like established bands, those would be the main ones. Yeah.
Out of those four, which would be the one that you would say that you had the best experience with and why?
They were all great experiences in their own ways. Just because they were each at different stages of my progression as a musician. I was about 15 when I started those bands, and I played in those bands all throughout high school. So it was a different time. I mean, it was basically just it was like having fun with my best friends. And the shows were great. We played ska music back then. During that time, ska music was really popular where I grew up in Orange County. So we got to play with a lot of amazing bands. We met great people, and I made a lot of friends. So that was just a special time for me. And I think another thing that made it special is the fact that we were young and we didn't really care. Making music a full-time career wasn't really on our minds. Making money wasn't a huge priority for us. So we just did it just because we loved being on stage and we loved hanging out. We loved writing, and the other bands, were great too. I consider them great experiences and learning lessons. As I got older and started playing and traveling more with the bands, I learned a lot especially with the last band that I did, the Ex-Presidents. Right, we got signed, and we went to a big studio, had a whole budget for an album, and so it was really great to be able to experience that. Just just a little glimpse of what it would be like, when you have a budget and a big studio and a producer, and but then you also you deal with downsides too. So, but I think I look back and I just think they were all great experiences.
In regards to your current act, after you broke up with the Appearance in 2008, you were trying to get this project off the ground, but if I understand correctly, you originally wanted to have other people in Let 'Em Riot, but you couldn't really find anyone that fit the bill?
I didn't think about going solo or anything like that. I mean, when the band broke up, my first thought was, okay, well, I'll just regroup. I'll find new members and start another band. I've done it hundreds of times before. I mean, this time shouldn't be any different. But that time it was I was getting older. I'm like, I'm not a teenager anymore. I can't just start over again. And finding these like-minded musicians that are all around my age. Everybody has jobs. Everybody's has responsibilities. So a lot of people couldn't really start bands or didn't really have the time or the resources to start something new. If the people I found, they're just like, oh well, if the gigs are paying, and I'm like, well, nothing pays. We're starting from scratch here, And so I found it really difficult to just find members. For months, I was going back and forth, and I was like, I had all these ideas that I wanted to get down, and I started thinking to myself, well, at least for the time being, until I find new members, let me start maybe just recording some stuff on the computer, just so I have these ideas down and I don't forget them. And then when I get a band, then I'll have something to bring to the table. But it just never really came to be. And, it wasn't until, months later that, I finally just started looking at all the songs I had been working on, and I'm just like, maybe I can just release this myself. And that's kind of where it all started for Let 'Em Riot.
In regards to your name, is it true that it comes from a quote in High Fidelity from Jack Black's character?
Yeah. Have you seen that?
I can't say that I have. There's so many classics that I haven't seen. I could be berated by everyone I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the greatest name in the world, but High Fidelity is like probably one of my all-time favorite movies. John Cusack, Jack Black. It's the whole premise of the film is John Cusack's a record store owner, and it's basically just has to do with music and relationships, breakups and ex-girlfriends, and to me it's just like the best movie ever. So I just thought it fitting to find something from that movie to use to name the group. I didn't really think it would stick. I was just kind of like, I heard it. I'm like, that sounds kind of cool. I'll just use that as a placeholder, until I think of something better. And I never did. So it just kind of stuck.
Did you ever have any other names in mind?
Yeah, I had a few. I can't even think of any. I wanted to do, and I actually, years later, I started a side project and named it. I wanted to name it Moderns LA, and just kind of have like, just like the Moderns and Regular Fun in LA, and like kind of like, just like a big like 80s, like right across the store. More like it was kind of like an LA Gear. You remember LA Gear clothing or something like that, just real 80s. And when I started a project back in like 2014, and we ended up just naming the group Moderns, which they're still around. I did that for about a year, and then there's a few others that were just not really very good.
So your first EP as Let 'Em Riot came out in 2010, The App. That was before any sort of the major synthwave milestone movies or anything came out, like Drive or even earlier stuff like Beyond the Black Rainbow. As someone who was around before the big sort of boom of the genre, besides the size, what would you say is the biggest difference between now and back then?
Now, the music has, context. It's, people go, oh, synthwave, and they get the whole aesthetic thing. But back then, I mean, I had never heard of the term synthwave. I don't even know if anybody had coined the phrase back then. I knew I liked 80s. I was a big fan of just like the old 80s synth stuff like Depeche Mode, Tears for Fears, OMD, Pet Shop Boys, stuff like that. In the late 2000s, I was thinking like 2008, there was groups that did that, kind of like, the name, Cut Copy, Empire of the Sun even back then, and M83 were doing stuff back then. And I remember like coming across some bands that were considered chill wave, like Neon Indian and Washed Out. And so I listened to a lot of the stuff, and I thought that was kind of cool because they would mix like the 80s feel, but the aesthetic really didn't show up until after the movies really hit. People were just kind of like, oh, it's 80s influence, it's chill wave, it's synth pop, and I think that was kind of what I was just going for. But then when stuff like new retro wave came out, people started getting that whole aesthetic, and the whole idea started to develop, and that's kind of where we are now.
In regards to your EP Wave, you're a pretty big gamer, or you used to be. Is it true that that's a reference to WoW, the title?
Yeah. I'm a big WoW player. Well, I was a big WoW player back then. Now I'm more of a casual, but I think around that time everybody was coming up with wave, like synth wave, chill wave. I mean, there's all these waves, and playing the game. I don't know if you're familiar with WoW, but you can do emotes. Like if you do /dance, your tune will start dancing. /laugh, and your tune bellows out this big laugh. And if you do /wave, your character just sticks out a hand and waves. And I'm like, well, that's kind of fun. I was kind of just poking fun at the whole wave thing that was going on, and I'm like, /wave, there you go. Yeah, it felt like at that time I was like, all these different kinds of waves, and I was just like, oh, here's my contribution, /wave.
Up until very recently, you had only been releasing EPs, and you just released your first LP a few months back after you signed with New Retro Wave, The Futurist. Mm-hmm. What made you decide it was finally time to release a full-length record?
Yeah, I think it was more New Retro Wave's idea. When we started talking about a release, I originally thought about maybe just doing like a re-release of /wave, just to kind of commemorate the 5 years. And I remember the label just being like, well, why don't we do something new? And I'm like, well, I have enough for like an EP. And they were like, well, no, I mean, they're probably like, let's do an album, let's kind of like, like you wanted to re-release /wave, so why don't we just, kind of combine, some of your old stuff with a few new songs, and we'll just make it an actual LP. And I was like, well, yeah, that works. I'm like, I've never released an album before, so I guess this could be my debut album. It seemed to go with, new label and my debut album. Yeah, I think that's it. It was just kind of like a, hashing out ideas with the label, and we just kind of, came up with it and made the decision to just release, an LP, which kind of new songs and some old songs.
Quick digression. Despite obviously 80s music being your biggest influence in this act, I heard somewhere that your favorite soundtrack is actually to Lost in Translation.
Yes, I love that movie. I mentioned High Fidelity. I think it'd be probably a tie between those two movies. I remember watching that movie, I think like 6 times in the theaters. I just it had the most amazing soundtrack. It was Kevin Shields did a lot of stuff on that, and Kevin Shields from my Bloody Valentine. It had Air on it. I have the soundtrack on vinyl, and it's just like I can't find it anywhere, but I found it on vinyl like maybe about a year or two ago. And so, but I just love it from start to finish. I can just sit there and just chill out. It's just like the greatest soundtrack.
Last question. A few years back, you said that you wouldn't necessarily categorize yourself as synthwave because of your vocals and the fact that many would automatically dismiss your work. Despite the passage of time and with more and more artists utilizing vocals, do you still feel that way about your music?
I always kind of felt like a fringe artist, mainly because I did vocals, and there's people, from both sides of the camp of synthwave purists say that synthwave is meant to be instrumental, but more and more you're seeing vocalists pop up, and they're getting thrown into the mix of synthwave. But it's like you could almost call it synth pop. I mean, there's so many different ways to categorize it, and I think lately people have been calling my music or categorizing my music as like dreamwave or dream pop, which is cool. I mean, it's like I try not to concentrate too much on how to define the music. I'm grateful that the project and the music's kind of found like a home. You know, it can fit somewhere where, you know, it puts everything into context for people who are just like discovering the genre. You know, because it can be, you know, it's a little overwhelming. Like, you know, for those people who don't listen to synthwave, to actually dive in and then find out there's a whole bunch of subgenres underneath it, it become overwhelming. But, you know, I'm just kind of grateful that, you know, my music is considered, you know, somewhere in there, even though it might not be strictly one type of synthwave. I think it's cool that I can kind of move around and I can add vocals. I can release like an instrumental and stuff like that, and I can just kind of, you know, play around with different ideas without actually fearing like, oh, you know what, you're not synthwave. I'm like, well, yeah, it never really was to begin with. So, you know, so it's kind of cool. I think I have the freedom to kind of just explore a little bit more.
All right, that does it for me. Any last words?
No, thank you for the opportunity.
Anytime. Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
You too.